We all have that Transformer that since the beginning we find ourselves coming back to with regular iterations that are released. And for me, it's Wheeljack. It wasn't just because Wheeljack was my very first Transformer that I think I come back to him. I think it also has a lot to do with my love of sports cars and the fact that the Lancia Stratos, when I found out that it was a real vehicle, that it wasn't just Wheeljack, but it was the Lancia Stratos in real life, and I saw the car for the first time in photographs, I was blown away. I was just like, this is one of the coolest cars that's ever been made by humans.
This is one of the best cars ever made.
Yeah, I'd go with that.
And that kind of appeal, I think, is what led me to want Wheeljack in the first place, even though I didn't know it. I thought the car was fictional at the time. I thought it was sort of a slightly made up kind of imaginary sports car. I was living in the United States in the 80s. I was 6. I had no idea the Lancia Stratos was a thing. But when I did find that out, and it also helped that Wheeljack is a good guy. He's one of the most prominent G1 characters. Just captured my imagination. If I had to pick other Transformers that have that effect on me to a degree, the second one would be Optimus Prime. Optimus Prime is a close second, and then Cliff Jumper jumps in there. For some reason, I love Cliff Jumper.
Okay, Optimus, jump him now! Optimus Prime, win!
But yeah, so Wheeljack is one that I freely admit I'm not a Transformers devotee in the sense of I'm not collecting every iteration of Wheeljack. I know that I have missed a few. So for example, I've missed the Prime Wheeljack that came out a few years ago. I think he had like 2 swords or something like that. And then there was one that was for Combiner Wars. I didn't pick that one up. There are a number that I haven't picked up, but over the years I've tried to pick up the major ones. So I have the original, of course, from 1984. I have the Generations one, which is part of the Chug group of Transformers. I have definitely the Masterpiece right here, which to my mind, it's really hard to beat that one. I mean, it's really hard to beat the Masterpiece one. I know people have their issues with various Masterpiece robots, but that one was really, really cool. Now, I wasn't aware of this because I've been out of it for so long as far as the Transformers game. I see them in toy aisles, but I don't, really give them much of a look. LioConvoy surprised me with the Kingdom War for Cybertron Trilogy Wheeljack, or whatever the name of it is. I can't follow all of the different names of these series anymore. I know there was Siege, and now there's Kingdom, and I guess War is the subtitle, and I'm sure if this goes on long enough, there'll be like, Bake Off for Cybertron or Square Dancing for Cybertron. I mean, it's just going to go on and on and on. But Wheeljack was introduced into this line. Now, from what I understand, he originally had War Battle Scarring Deco. This version that's been released is released clean, which is what I would prefer because in alt mode as a car, I don't really want a Lancia Stratos with Monte Carlo Rally livery all over it to be all trashed out. Although, when I think about it, if you're wanting to depict a rally car in mid-rally, then it would kind of look like that.
I'm going to change gear now. This will involve man-touching.
Officially then, that makes this Kingdom War of Cybertron Trilogy Wheeljack, that's a mouthful, it makes this Wheeljack my 4th. Not including my childhood original 84, so it makes it my 5th. At first glance, I noticed that this Wheeljack continues in Hasbro's tradition of trying to integrate all of the different parts of a robot or character into the transformation itself. This is something that they started really hard on in the Chug series, where pieces would integrate properly and try to become parts of the car. So for example, the Generations Wheeljack, his side exhaust pipes become his weapons in a way, his shoulder cannons. This Kingdom Wheeljack has kind of the same philosophy, where pieces of him sort of become the wings on the back, although they are desperately too short. And then of course you have his famous shoulder missile launcher, which in this case doesn't really integrate into the underbelly of the car like it did with Generations. In this particular instance, it actually sits on the top of the roof. It almost feels like a Twisted Metal situation, like these versions of the Transformers could be in a Twisted Metal video game. At least that's the naive impression that I get from them as somebody that doesn't follow this line very closely. The livery they've used on the Kingdom Wheeljack is just enough to harken back to the original Italia livery from the Monte Carlo Rally on the Lancia Stratos, but it is legally distinct for royalty purposes. It is a more muted green, it's not so bright and primary, and they use different numbers and different lettering on the car. However, the overall impression is supposed to be identical to the original Lancia. The transformation tolerances on this Wheeljack are very tight and precise, even more so than the Generations one. Not as much as the Masterpiece, obviously, but nobody's expecting that. This is a general release figure, whereas Masterpiece figures are a much higher standard. That being said, I did have some difficulty trying to get this figure transformed because the joints being as precise as they are and the seam lines and everything like that, I was concerned at times that I might break it, and thankfully that didn't occur. It was just probably its newness out of the box, but it turns into a very nice figure. And like with the Generations line and of course the Masterpiece line, the Wheeljack that appears out of this sort of Lancia is very well articulated, very well detailed. You can say he is an action figure for once. Unlike the original 1984, that kind of hints at a robot. You know, he kind of hangs there. He doesn't really have a lot of articulation outside of his arms. These new ones that came from the Classics and Generations era are truly action figures when you get done transforming them, which was always the dream when we were kids. The actual robot joints of Wheeljack are a bit loose here and there. I don't know if that's standard on all of them or if it's just my example. It's nothing to be overly concerned about. But at the same time, I do need to point it out because it doesn't have that action figure joint stiffness here and there, which is a little disappointing. However, it's not unlike the Generations version, which also has a little bit of that loosey-goosiness to some of its joints and, knees and elbows and things like that. It's certainly no Masterpiece edition as far as having the proper joint tension, and I do admit that because I haven't transformed my Masterpiece one all that often, that may be a factor as well. The Masterpiece one might loosen up a lot over time if I was to keep fiddling with it, but I really don't. Admittedly, I mostly display it as the Lancia because I'm so in love with that car. The only real oddity with this Kingdom Wheeljack as far as its transformation is concerned is the windshield. I'm not quite sure why the windscreen on this vehicle was designed to split in half for the transformation into the robot. That is a first with Wheeljacks as far as I know. Now there may be third parties or even an official Takara Hasbro version in the past that did that, but I've never seen one until the Kingdom one. And what makes that odd for me is that the Lancia Stratos windscreen is one of the most iconic parts of the car.
It was styled by Bertoni, and it was completely impractical.
But also that slightly more subjective thing of how gorgeous it looks. Stop doing that to my name.
It's one of the most unique features of the vehicle. So to put a seam line right down the middle of it and make that a split point, that was risky. It really was. Now, when you turn it into the car, all of the tolerances and the joints and the clips and the tabs, they all lock up nice and snug, but I wonder for how long. I wonder if this part of the car could start to loosen up after a while and then not look as nice in its alt Lancia-ish mode. If I had to rate my 4 Wheeljacks, I would definitely say that this is one of the better general release Wheeljacks. As far as my favorite, the Masterpiece is always going to be my favorite because it is so accurate to the original Lancia Stratos. It has the license for that car, it has the right livery, it looks great, and it turns into an excellent representation of Wheeljack with all of the articulation and detail you would expect. However, if you're talking about Generations versus the Kingdom one, I'm kind of going to give it to the Kingdom one on this one because the Generations figure, as nice as it was at the time, it looked more like a bloated Dodge Viper or Corvette in its alt car mode, and its robot mode, while nice enough, was kind of all over the place. It was very bulky and rather loosey-goosey in the joints, as I said. Great posability. It's probably the best one of all of these outside of the Masterpiece for posability, but it's just not as visually appealing. And then, of course, in alt mode, I would give it to the Masterpiece first, and then the G1. The G1, of course, is the worst in robot mode. I love G1s to death, and they will always be nostalgic for me. But as far as the robot mode, it's very disappointing. Whereas the Masterpiece wins there. I would definitely say, as far as the robot mode goes, the Kingdom one is second place. A very nice second place. And I think overall, the Kingdom War of Cybertron trilogy Wheeljack, if you don't own a Wheeljack, I would say that's the one to start with. That's the one to go for. That's the one that, if you have any interest in Wheeljack or you have any interest in Transformers in general, he's a great one to get. He's a great character who turns into a great vehicle, and the Kingdom figure is not bad at all. Thumbs up.
What are you whinging about?
I'm a Stratos too. I just wish I'd been included in the video.
Oh, quit whining. At least you have your arms. I hope you fly into a window.